If there's one company synonymous with cartoons from the 1950s through the early 1970s, it has to be Hanna-Barbera. The studio, formed by legendary Tom and Jerry creators William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, had a hand in creating, animating, or producing some of television's most classic animated shows, with possibly their most successful and enduring being 1969's Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? The show's premise was simple. A group of teens solves mysteries with the aid of their talking pet dog, foiling the schemes of the nefarious villains they encounter in various creepy locations. Scooby-Doo's overnight popularity would lead to the conception of a number of shows attempting to emulate the same formula, with most meeting a quick end, remembered as little more than novelties of the era. One of these imitators, however, managed to make a lasting name for itself, shedding the stigma of being a mere mimic and finding respectability as its own legitimate property that has continuously popped up in new iterations throughout the following decades. Josie and the Pussycats. A cartoon about a three-piece, all-female rock band and their management team who tour the world, all the while putting a stop to plans of world domination from Earth's most evil forces. With an instantly recognizable art style, and inspired by a love that spanned over 50 years, it's animated comfort food, as Americana as the flag itself, just wrapped up in long tails and ears for hats. You're invited, so come along while we look back at Josie and the Pussycats. Josie and the Pussycats finds life by way of cartoonist Dan DeCarlo. Born in 1919 in New York, DeCarlo had an early passion for art, attending Manhattan's Art Students League before being drafted into the US Army, where he would draw airplane nose art and work on the military-themed comic strip titled 418th Scandal Street. Shortly after being stationed in London, Dan would come across the future inspiration for Josie and the Pussycats. In 1945, following the aftermath of World War II's Battle of the Bulge, Dan made his way to Belgium, and it's there he met his future wife, Josie Dumont. Despite not sharing a common language, the two had an immediate connection, and DeCarlo would rely on his artistic abilities to communicate, drawing cartoons as a way to bridge the linguistic gap between them. The pair fell for each other, and at the risk of being sent back to America without Josie, DeCarlo re-enlisted with the armed forces, allowing time for the two to get married. After returning to the West, Dan would break into the comic book industry, bouncing around various companies, including a notable stint working under the legendary Stan Lee, before finally settling and working on Archie comics, where his signature art style ended up becoming the standard for the publisher. It was while working at Archie that DeCarlo was inspired to create the Josie character. As Josie Dumont recalls, "We were going on a cruise. I had a friend who made me a costume, and that was the Pussycat costume. When I came in with the costume, Dan actually decided that it should be made a little sexier. I had a hat with a point on the forehead, cut around the eyes. He thought it was very nice, but it covered my whole head. And then he decided that we would just use the ears. When we had the whole costume together, that's when Josie was created." The character officially made her debut in a minor role in 1962's Archie's Pals and Gals comic, before starring in her own 1963 comic book series, She's Josie. And in 1969, the comic would finally settle on its most recognized title, Josie and the Pussycats. In 1968, The Archie Show, a cartoon based on the comic book series, was not only a hit on television, but on the radio charts as well. landing at #1 with the hit song, Sugar Sugar. Seeing the heights musical cartoons would reach, combined with the growing viewership ensemble shows were attracting, would lead Hanna-Barbera to purchase the television rights to Josie and the Pussycats, who would adapt the comic to add to their animated lineup. The series ran for one season from 1970 to 1971, with a total of 16 episodes. But it's the characters and their iconic outfits that seem to be remembered more than the show itself. So let's take a look at the cartoon and see if it lives up to its leopard print unitards. When an established property makes the transition to television, many difficulties arise. One of the most glaring being how to remain artistically faithful to the original source material while introducing this world to a brand new audience. For Josie, this move was seamless. The look of DeCarlo's characters were a perfect match for the Hanna-Barbera human designs, giving us the most recognizable versions of these characters to date. The style is completely timeless. You can look at it and know exactly which studio and the period of time it hails from. Truly Americana. With a look down, we come to the cast. It's unexpectedly large, with 7 total main characters. First, we have the band, led by Josie, the leader of the Pussycats. She's the love interest of Alan and the bane of Alexander's existence. Next, we have Valerie. She doubles as a tambourine player and brain of the entire crew. Rounding out the trio is Melody, the drummer and the group Ditz, misunderstanding the simplest concepts and replying to any situation with a wince-inducing pun. The rest of the crew is filled in by the gang's team, led by Alexander, the band's manager and resident chicken of the 7, Alan, the roadie and quasi-leader of the group, Alexandra, Alexander's sister, and the sourpuss, always wanting to be the center of attention and to steal Alan away from Josie. And finally, Sebastian, the snarky pet who acts as the frequent Deus Ex Machina, able to get the group out of danger with his Swiss Army claws. The voice casting here is top-notch, with the most notable being Casey Kasem, known best as the voice of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, and Janet Waldo, a Hanna-Barbera voice veteran who plays Josie and is famous for also providing vocals for Wacky Race's Penelope Pitstop and the Jetsons' Jane Jetson. Barbara Parriott, Don Messick, Jackie Joseph, Shelby Alberoni, and Jerry Dexter round out the remaining voice cast, and they're as professional as they get, selling the goofy dialogue they've been given. As stated before, it's a substantial troupe, with the 7 characters crossing off several stereotypes: the handsome muscle, the dainty female, the coward, the thinker, the goofball, the jealous one, and the animal friend. Now individually, these characters aren't groundbreaking. They're serviceable for sure, but where they manage to separate themselves is within their interpersonal dynamics. There's no running story. Each episode acts as its own standalone adventure, so the relationships between the characters don't grow or evolve. And realistically, several of the characters could have been combined without losing much. Look at Scooby-Doo. Over time, their team of 5 reduced to 2, and though it may not have been popular then, it shows that it was certainly possible to do. Where the real strength lies is this feeling of a long-standing history between the group members. For instance, Alexandra pines after Alan and despises Josie, but you get the impression that this has been going on for much longer than we're privy to. The characters also reference each other's quirks, with callbacks to their tendencies throughout. When Alexander points out Melody's ears wiggling over multiple episodes, it gives a sense that everyone has known each other for an extended duration. And since the characters are often mixed and matched to come up with plans or act as distractions, plenty of opportunities arise for various interactions, which is definitely one of the highlights of the show. The episode structure for Josie and the Pussycats is as follows. The band and their team travel to a foreign land to perform, but upon arrival, they find themselves thrust into the middle of a villainous scheme, where they have to foil the bad guys' attempts at world domination, while of course, still making their gig. What makes this show stand on its own are a few aspects. First is the foes the Pussycats face. They're bizarre in both their looks and schemes. They wear odd costumes and have weird looks about them, and more often than not, come across as these evil geniuses who are also just ordinary, bumbling folks. In one scene, Alexandra disguises herself as a villain and asks the evildoer they're trying to dupe to split the world with her when he's taking it over. He refuses, and she threatens to take it over herself, so he whimpers and reluctantly agrees to share it with her 50-50. He comes off as sniveling, and it's funny to see this powerful, ego-driven genius who can control the world, but is still willing to take a deal the second he encounters even the slightest pushback. Another instance shows one of the baddies doing paperwork at his desk, and when 3 members of the gang come in disguised as custodial service people, he lets them through and tells them to hurry up because he's busy. It's this kind of ahead of its time meta humor, channeled mostly through the criminals, that make this show really stand out from its contemporaries. It also gives off an impression that the adventures are grandiose. Since every episode spans in a different location on the globe, you're never quite sure which exotic locale you'll be taken to next. Accompanying their globetrotting, there's a unique aura of true danger that follows them with their encounters. The pursuit of the kids feels more determined from the baddies, often going out of their way to capture and ultimately end them by launching them into space or even down below to the depths of the ocean. Knowing that Josie and co are in ever-present peril gives added weightiness, and you want to see how they get out of the situation they're in, no matter how serious or how silly that plan is. For as enjoyable as the show is, what may have the most production put into it, and thus comes across as the highest quality, is the music. I don't mean the ambient scene songs though, with a number actually being directly lifted from Scooby-Doo. I mean the actual studio-produced numbers that play a majority of the time during chase scenes. The thinking behind this goes back to the Archie's hit Sugar Sugar. Knowing the possibility of having a hit song come from a hit cartoon was enticing enough for Hanna-Barbera to put together a real-life Josie and the Pussycats that would release real music that would be featured in the cartoon. And simply put, the songs are fantastic. With Scooby-Doo featuring a soundtrack that captures the groovy sounds of the 60s, see 7 Days a Week and Pretty Mary Sunlight as the catchiest examples, the Pussycats carry the musical baton into the next decade, still containing remnants of the psychedelic sounds of the decade past, but Josie's sound is more diverse, combining soul, rock, and even a tidbit of funk thrown in at a few points. The songs are a joy to listen to. There's only an album's worth of songs, and I highly advise doing yourself a favor and giving your ears a treat. Josie and the Pussycats really is a perfect show, in context. For the time, It's right in line with other animated mystery shows, better than most even, due in part to the previously mentioned music and fun character interactions. Looking at it in a vacuum, though, there is a bit to be desired. The characters come off as mostly vanilla, except for their singular traits, especially Josie, who may have the least amount of dialogue out of everyone outside of their cat Sebastian. Her entire character is intended to be the pretty girl, the de facto mascot of the show, and the main romantic competition for Alexandra. She hardly gets any lines, and for a show to underutilize its main star, it's a real shame they couldn't find more to do with her. The same goes for Alan. Not doing much except pointing the gang in the right direction to go, he falls into the center of this Venn diagram, not having much to him, but also essentially being a character ripoff, looking and acting like Fred from Scooby-Doo. And on the furthest end of the spectrum, we have Alexander, the group's manager and Alexandra's brother, who is as close to a one-to-one copy of Shaggy. Not just down to his green shirt and messy brown hair, but he's voiced by Casey Kasem, the original voice of Shaggy. His voice is instantly recognizable, and he's a great actor, but it felt more like a way to get Shaggy into the show, rather than developing a character of their own. Thankfully, these are minor quibbles, and again, it is a product of its time. It was meant to be watched once a week, so keeping characters consistent for viewers was definitely key. But it does make you wonder how a version updated for today would fare. The benefit of a show that follows a weekly formula is that if you like one episode, there's a good chance you'll find yourself a fan of the series. These are some of my favorite episodes, and ones I would recommend any fan or anyone interested in the series see for themselves. Episode 1, The Nemo's A No-No Affair. While in transit to American Samoa via boat, Josie and crew are taken hostage by the evil Captain Nemo, who is bent on dominating the Seven Seas. The first episode of the series, The Nemo's A No-No Affair, is the perfect introduction to what the show would be all about. Rapid-fire wisecracks, Alexandra jealously scheming against Josie, a non-stop barrage of puns, and my favorite constant throughout, the hilariously over-the-top villains. Captain Nemo is my favorite of the bad guys, having a wingtip hairdo and controlling his battle submarine by playing the organ. It's ridiculously ludicrous, and you almost can't believe it's a real show, but it does have the charm and the most fun adventure of the entire series. Episode 2, A Green Thumb is Not a Gold Finger. While on a trip to Nashville, the crew's flight gets diverted to the Amazon jungle, where they must stop the evil Dr. Green Thumb from releasing his destructive plants worldwide. This episode follows the crew as they stumble upon the evil Dr. Green Thumb's plantation, where he's growing plants that can destroy other plants, which he will use to take over the world. This episode allows characters to shine more. Alexandra's mean streak is beginning to become a fun staple, and we get the introduction to Melody's ears wiggling when danger is present, and the plants have heartbeat sounds that are pretty creepy. Oh yeah, watch out for the horrifying screams. Episode 4, Swap, Plot, Flop. Josie and crew perform a show in the Middle East and wind up in a plot to save a princess from an evil hypnotist's spell. Another solid episode, but notable for one specific reason: the humor. This is by far the funniest episode, single-handedly buoyed by Melody. The evil hypnotist places her under his spell, but she's so ditzy, she can't even be an obedient slave correctly. And every line is hilarious. I won't spoil it, but the laughs start with, instead of calling him Master, Melody calls the hypnotist Mustard. She alone makes this one worth watching. Episode 6, X Marks the Spot. During a tour in England, the crew comes across a scientist who has developed an invisibility potion and needs to protect him from the man who has stolen it. This episode feels the most complete, hitting everything the show has done up to this point, and puts it together in a riveting 30 minutes. A fun plot, a threatening villain, good laughs, and featuring a great song. Josie and the Pussycats had everything needed to become a hit, and yet it only lasted for 16 episodes. Why didn't it take off the way it was intended? In my estimation, it was due in large part to oversaturation. The amount of teen sleuth shows around that time was staggering. There was Goober and the Ghost Chasers, Jabberjaw, Captain Caveman, Speed Buggy, The Funky Phantom, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids are a few for good measure. For as good as Josie might have been, TV sets were flooded with Scooby-Doo-esque shows. And though Pussycats had its own unique spin, it eventually got lost in the mix. It was good, but didn't stand out enough, leading to its first and only season. For a cartoon that was meant to capitalize on multiple trends at once, Josie and the Pussycats has, against all odds, carved out a healthy and lasting legacy all its own in multiple mediums. The band still features regularly in print, making cameo appearances in Archie, being rebooted as vampires, and even getting its own Japanese manga. In 2001, a live-action Josie and the Pussycats movie was made, and while it lives on as a cult hit, DeCarlo and his beau were not fans of the film. As Josie recounts, "We didn't like the movie. We went to see the movie because we wanted to be able to give our opinion to people who ask us about the movie. It was nothing like the cartoon. When they had the cartoons on TV, that was fun. But no, the real-life movie, I was not impressed at all with that." Later in 2001, DeCarlo would pass away, and a little more than a decade later, his wife Josie would follow. But the character that was conceived from a love between the two continues to live on, most recently returning to television in live-action form, as characters in the teen drama Riverdale. In the end, no matter what DeCarlo thought of the projects the Pussycats were involved in, they were still his favorite pet project. As Josie Dumont puts it, the biggest thrill of his career really, it was Josie, because there were so many things that put us together. He created Josie and had me in mind. That makes me feel good to think that he got so excited about putting this together. Josie and the Pussycats was born out of Dan DeCarlo's love for his wife, and by creating a character that is adored by so many, he is assured that their love will live on forever.